Tonight, Michael Cohen heading to federal prison. President Trump's former attorney and avowed fixer with harsh words for his old boss, the president, after receiving his 3-year sentence. A former federal prosecutor joins us to weigh in on that and the latest on the Russia probe. And as we approach the 6th anniversary of the Sandy Hook massacre, we are learning a lot about the shooter and all the red flags that could have been spotted by a number of authorities. Then, residents got their first chance to vent about the Amazon deal directly to the company and New York City leaders. Things, they got hairy. We'll show you what happened today and debate the pros and the cons of Amazon coming to town. Good evening and welcome to RFL. I'm Richard French, and thank you for joining us this Wednesday evening. Well, the former attorney for the President of the United States, he is headed to federal prison. Our Dominic Carter, he was at the courthouse. That is the judge, handed down a 3-year sentence for Michael Cohen. Dom?
And good evening, Richard. It was a remarkable day.
How do you feel, Mr. Cohen, please? President Trump going down, Michael.
At times, choking back tears, the one-time fixer for President Trump tore into him in open court. Standing in front of the podium, Michael Cohen said, quote, "Time and again, I felt it was my duty to cover up his dirty deeds rather than listen to my own voice." He went on, "It was my own weakness and a blind loyalty to this man that led me to choose a path of darkness over light."
Mr. Cohen, Mr. Cohen, Mr. Cohen, Mr. Cohen.
Judge William Pauley said Cohen had committed a smorgasbord of crimes involving deception and motivated by personal greed and ambition. Quoting Judge Pauley, "As a lawyer, Mr. Cohen should have known better." Cohen received the 3 years in prison for tax evasion, lying to Congress, and campaign finance violations. The lawyer for Stormy Daniels, one of the women Cohen says he paid off for President Trump, was in the courtroom.
Michael Cohen was sentenced today. Donald Trump is next.
Also at the prosecution's table, Richard, were attorneys from the independent counsel's office. Cohen, for his part, made clear he plans on continuing to talk. At the federal courthouse in Lower Manhattan, I'm Dominic Carter. Richard, let's go back to you in the studio.
All right, thank you very much, Dom. And by the way, not a peep or a tweet from President Trump about the Cohen sentencing or what Cohen said about the president. But reports are that Trump is, quote, seething about the whole ordeal. Also today, the publisher of the National Enquirer just reached an agreement to cooperate with the federal prosecutors. In exchange, American media will not be prosecuted for possible campaign finance violations. Now, the publisher admitted that it was involved in the scheme to so-called catch-and-kill stories about women having affairs with Donald Trump. Porn star Stormy Daniels and former Playboy playmate Karen McDougal were apparently paid 6 figures each to keep quiet. The Enquirer then agreed not to publish those stories during the campaign. Prosecutors say that was a campaign finance violation. Now, as Dom explained in his piece, Michael Cohen, he was involved in the whole thing. And joining us now, former federal prosecutor Joseph Marino. Joe, I appreciate the time. So much to unpack here, but let's first start with Michael Cohen. Were you surprised at all that he still got time, albeit 3 years?
Richard, I would say it was a significant sentence and yet not a surprising one. The Department of Justice takes really seriously white-collar crimes like tax fraud, bank fraud, campaign finance abuse, lying to Congress, all things that Michael Cohen was facing. People tend to think because it's not a violent crime, you might not get jail time, and that's not the case. And so what we saw was a fairly significant sentence. It was a little below the sentencing guidelines, but it was still 3 years. It's nothing to sneeze at. And Michael Cohen's cooperation with the special counsel may have got him a little nod, but certainly did not get him the leniency he was hoping for.
And again, this may be a little inside baseball, but it seemed the actual taxi medallion scheme that he was involved in that was attached to both his wife and his father-in-law, they were not implicated. That had to be part of the behind-the-scenes agreement, right?
That could be. I mean, those are probably state charges.
Yep.
So there was probably some discussion about, when they brought this case together, what exactly they were going to charge him with, what he was willing to plead to, and there was definitely some meeting of the minds there.
Okay, so if you followed just today, it would seem he stayed in the lane of the campaign finances abuses and the hush payments that were involved to the woman we mentioned. But there was a clear indication that his cooperation did not end today. And before he goes away in the spring to prison, he will continue to cooperate with Mueller. He's also said, and his attorney we'll get to in a second, that he's going to be more than happy to go up to Capitol Hill and talk as well to congressional committees. Talk first about where his cooperation beyond today, but before he goes away, where that may lead.
Well, I mean, who knows, right? I mean, those of us who have been watching this intently since the beginning have always thought that Michael Cohen is probably the biggest danger to President Trump because he has years of involvement with him and his business. So I think when we heard about his cooperation basically being limited to these campaign finance abuses, there may have been a sigh of relief to say, okay, well, maybe that's just it. But if, in fact, he does have more to cooperate with and he will be talking both to the special counsel and maybe to Congress, it certainly could benefit him in his sentence. He still could get time reduced from his sentence. And there's no saying where and how that could affect the president and his inner circle.
I'm going all over the place here, Joe, but I'm curious because Lanny Davis, and many people obviously remember him from his time in the political circles in Washington or a prior administration. He said and stated something that I'm wondering if it was necessarily in the best interest of his client. Let me remind people a soundbite that he said long before today, but when Michael Cohen was clearly on the radar and Lanny Davis was representing him, about a pardon in the president.
Would Michael Cohen seek a pardon from the President of the United States for any of this?
The answer is definitively no, under no circumstances.
Okay, so that was before where they ruled out a pardon, and then I want to get to the statement that Lanny Davis said today. And again, we can bring it up on the screen here. He says in part, at the appropriate time, after Mr. Mueller completes his investigation and issues his final report, I look forward to assisting Michael to state publicly all he knows about Mr. Trump, and that includes any appropriate congressional committee interested in the search for truth and the difference between facts and lies. Clearly, Lanny doesn't like the president, okay? And I'll probably raise my hand with him on that, but why would any attorney rule out the possibility of wanting a pardon instead of going away for 3 years?
Well, first of all, you don't seek a pardon, right? Whether Mr. Cohen gets a pardon or not is completely the president's decision. So he can say what he wants in front of the cameras, but the reality is you don't need to accept a pardon or seek it.
Fair enough, but you get my point, Joe, that Lanny Davis seemed to be actively having his own agenda here where he was looking to expose all the dirty dealings of the president. Yes, as a cooperating witness, and he's your client, you're going to try and be as forthcoming as you would to the feds, to the state officials. I get all that. But he seemed at times to be, talking more for himself than for his client. Am I wrong?
Well, there's no doubt that Mr. Davis is or was Mr. Cohen's television lawyer. He is not his courtroom lawyer. He was not there today at the sentencing hearing. That was Guy Petrillo. Guy Petrillo is a very, very talented former prosecutor from the Southern District of New York. So you have the guy you go to for the nuts and bolts of your defense, and then you have the guy that's sort of your bulldog who you put out on the airwaves, and sometimes you kind of lose control of that message.
Fair enough. Now, I want to talk about another acronym the public may have heard today but not connected, AMI. More specifically, they're known as the parent company for the Inquirer. And the catch and kill stories that people are now getting familiar with. David Pecker has agreed to basically be a cooperating witness with the feds. Talk about how that could be substantial given his long-standing relationship with Donald Trump and obviously willingness to kill stories that the Donald wanted to go away.
Well, remember, so Richard, we learned last week that there are 2 potential campaign finance violations that are in the universe of what we're talking about here, right? One was the Stormy Daniels payment that went through Michael Cohen and a shell company in a series of payments that he was reimbursed over time. The other one, as you pointed out, went through the National Enquirer in a sort of catch and kill scenario. So the fact that both Michael Cohen has cooperated on the first instance, and now you have the National Enquirer's parent company cooperating on the second instance of potential campaign finance violations. That's significant for a number of reasons, most of which is you don't only have to take Michael Cohen's word for it now. You have independent corroboration, potentially, of evidence tying the president to these potential violations.
Obviously a lot of this is related to the law, but also a lot of this is for the public domain here and the political discourse that in the end we'll see what kind of appetite there is in Washington. The president has tried to minimize every single revelation. He called the deal as it related to the payments, private transactions and nothing more, limited to simply a civil issue. He also said that anything that Cohen did, well, you know what, he was a bad attorney. I trusted him. That's his job, not mine. How much of the calculation, I asked this last night, I'm curious from your perspective, when Mueller looks at what is going out there in the ethos here on both Capitol Hill and in the public discourse on this, is he going to be crafting a report, and does he understand that the bar isn't simply a campaign finance violation or something that's significant maybe to you and I, but to the public, they say, oh, some meeting at the Trump Tower, what's there to it? Is he going to craft a consumable document, but also something that will grab the attention of the national public? Even if that is not his stated mission, does he understand that the bar has been set very high here to shock the American public?
Richard, you're absolutely right. This is a sort of trial like no other, because you're not a prosecutor here building a case in a federal courthouse. You're building a case in the court of public opinion, because ultimately that's where this is going. So you're right. It has to be digestible. It has to be something the public would understand and relate to. So it's not a highly technical legal case you're constructing here. What you're constructing is a story that's supported by evidence, by facts, by witnesses, and ultimately whether the public digests that story and says, I'm okay with these activities or I'm not okay with these activities, that's ultimately where this is going, and Congress and the American people will have to decide that.
Two more questions. Maria Butina, the Russian agent, if you will. To me, the most significant part of the story that I think isn't being referenced as much is if she served as a go-between of as much as $100 million of oligarch money from the Russians that went to the NRA that then went directly into the Trump campaign, directly or indirectly, but for the purposes of the election of Donald Trump, the Russians aren't doing this out of just goodwill here. I would imagine that the Mueller team has probably been chasing this paper trail if, in fact, there's a there there. This could be really significant. Am I wrong?
You're not wrong, right? I mean, this is already an explosive case, right? You have an individual here within our borders operating at the direction of the Russian government, infiltrating Republican-affiliated groups at a fairly high level, right? So that's already an explosive story that just comes out of the newspapers, comes out of the headlines, right? That happening at the same time we know that Russia was interfering with the 2016 presidential election and this ongoing investigation of the Trump campaign could be very, very explosive if, in fact, there's a connection between the two. And I have no doubt one moment that the special counsel has been vigorously looking at the Butina case and is most likely involved with any plea negotiations that's been reported she's ongoing with at this time.
Joe, last question. We're bringing up that grid of the 16 names here that have been implicated or indicted or convicted. First of all, the idea that we have kind of accepted as a norm that the personal attorney for the president is going away, his campaign manager is going to be going away, as well as others. I mean, that should be stunning in and of itself. But nonetheless, of the names up on my screen, from the Flynns to the Manaforts to the Carter Pages to the Roger Stones to so many other potential ones that are up there, including the ones we talked about, first guess for me, who do you think, when it's all said and done, will be the most significant player in terms of stories they have to say about the president's involvement?
Well, I would have said Michael Cohen to this point, again, because he had years of involvement with the president at the Trump organization level and during the campaign. So whether or not he has more to give than we've already learned, that's number one question. The number two question would be, who are the others orbiting the president's inner circle, going back to his days when he was running the Trump organization? What do they know about his business, his transactions, the campaign, who he was talking to? I mean, that's really so many open questions here. I have no doubt in my mind the special counsel is looking at all of that.
Very interesting. Joe Marino, great job today. I appreciate it.
Good to be here, Richard.
All right, when we come back here, Congresswoman Elizabeth Estes, she joins us, a Connecticut Democrat. She represents the district containing Sandy Hook. been nearly 6 years to the day since the shootings at the elementary school, and the Congresswoman will tell us how the community is dealing and changes she'd like to see made to gun laws.